meeting graduation requirements. But it also, however, provided that districts with fewer than 2,000 students can be waived from that requirement. So WAC 180.18.100, a new section in the waiver chapter of our rules, establishes who is eligible for those waivers, what the application is, and how determination is made of whether to grant the waiver. And finally, the rules reach into the private school code to clarify the graduation requirements, the minimum requirements for private schools to grant a high school diploma with regard to the CTE credit because of some changes made in the language there. And want to emphasize, following Sarah's comments, that this is only one of the several ways to submit public comment on these rules. All agencies are required by the Washington Administrative Code to solicit public comment on rules before they can be adopted by an agency. And this is part of our effort. As Sarah mentioned, the public hearing is in Spokane next month. Because of the location over there, we want to take an extra measure to provide a public setting for comment on this side of the state. But you or others interested, your friends, colleagues, can testify at the hearing on the 9th, as Sarah mentioned. You can email us at the address here. You can send a letter to the state board at the address found here, or you can phone us. And however you choose to make the comment, be assured that it will be promptly sent to the members of the board for their review. And in fact, I just shipped 8 or 10 comments we've received by email to our board just in the last half an hour. So with that, we will begin with public comments, and we are pleased to have legislators with us here today, as well as Ms. Maxwell from the Governor's Office and Representative Hunt and Rakedown. And Marcy, wanted to give you an opportunity to comment first, if you would like, or perhaps what.
Just real quick, because we had technical difficulties with the folks on the phone, I just want to go over those 2 things I said at the beginning so they can hear.
Sure.
Sorry, and then we'll go right into that. So those on the phone, we finished with the summary, and the PowerPoint that Jack just gave, along with the audio from today, will both be available on our website early next week. We're going to start with comment from folks in the room, and then when they're done, we'll move to comments from those on the webinar. And those on the webinar, if you want to make a comment or have a question, go ahead and type it in the chat feature on the webinar, and we will read those out loud. That's it. Okay.
So, want to start with the names? Sign-up sheet. And please, again, if you have not signed up and wish to comment, please do so we can be sure not to miss you.
If you're not making a comment, you can type it out.
Okay. I think we probably have the students first here.
First one's here.
Yeah, they were the first ones here, and they got the good seats. The first to sign in, Lexi Samarano. Lexi, please.
So I'm the teacher of these fabulous students. I'm from Floridian Technology Academy, and we were asked to come by the Voters Education Group to kind of talk about parent involvement in all these rules. As you were thinking about making changes, kind of our take on how parents should have a little bit more say in these rules. I thought this was a little bit different a form, so I'm going to kind of amend what I have to say. But my biggest belief as a teacher that I'm with my kids 180 hours throughout the year. Parents are with their kids a lot more, 10 times as many. Parents a lot of research around that, but many parents have expressed a little bit of discontent with not having more say around how their students are meeting these graduation requirements, especially as they're becoming more rigorous, which I totally agree with. I think parents need to be more involved in what classes their students are picking, when they're going to retake things, how high they're going to go, what kind of challenging classes they're going to take, and that sort of thing. Also, parents, and this kind of goes along with this, parents need to be educated a lot more on the requirements. We educate our students quite a bit, but our parents aren't in our classes. And we try to send flyers, we try to have things electronically to them, but I think there needs to be new ideas and new innovative ideas that get the word out and teaches parents exactly what their kids are doing 6-8 hours a day, and how they're going to get through the system of school, especially in my school where there's a lot more migrant immigrants from other countries. They don't understand the American school system. It's very much different from any other country, and especially if they're coming from countries that don't have a formal school system, they don't understand any of this, and they're expecting their children to get all the information for them. And so there has to be a better way to get information from the state level, from the district level, into the parents' hands. So I want to end there and then continue on with my students.
That would be my turn. My cue, isn't it? I think we have Sammy Sue. What was it? Chu. Sorry.
I was also at Cambrian High School for the Technology Academy, and I was going to build off what Ms. Conrada said, kind of talking about the diversity within KM. We have over 70, to my knowledge, 70 languages spoken within our school. My parents are very involved in my academic career, but what I've learned throughout my 2 years of being at KM, having an older brother go through this high school, many parents of the students are refugees, non-English speakers, or do not live in the U.S. at all, and they also do not know how the system works, and they a lot of times are afraid to get involved in the system because we do not have ways to communicate with them or build the relationship to get them to feel comfortable with being in our school and getting involved in their students' lives. In the Tech Academy this year, we identified a problem within the community and tried to determine a solution. We really identified the low graduation rates and how parental involvement can really affect that. Just to share a little bit of those statistics, Kentwood has a graduation rate of 88.2%, Kent Lake 87.4%, Kent Ridge 92.6%. Kent Mountain View Academy is 81.3%, and Kent Phoenix Academy is at 49.6%. Kent Phoenix Academy is an online school, which really means that their program, their own education is in the student's hands, and the parents aren't very involved because it's more of an alternative school, and that is why we believe that they kind of have a lower graduation rate because of the different demographics that are represented in that school. And we believe that parent involvement is very important for student success. For example, there was a report that I found on the National Education Association website that states that regardless of a family's income or background, students who had parents involved in their academic careers were more likely to earn high grades, pass their classes, attend school regularly, have better social skills, good behavior, and graduate. These parenting support systems help them know how to get involved by overcoming language barriers, culture differences, and the lack of relationships with teachers and staff in school. Thank you.
John. Maggie Haggerty. Maggie.
Hey, I'm Maggie. Okay, I'm also a sophomore at Kent Academy. And I'm also living with Sammy. My parents want to be more involved. They can't always be involved because they both work full-time jobs. And the second they get home, they're taking care of my two toddler sisters. So it's pretty hard for them to be able to be totally involved with my schooling. But it's not, they're there when I need them. And I think that's really crucial for students to have, because if their parents don't know what's going on, then it's kind of like, how are they supposed to know what to do?
Thank you. Star Lowe.
Hi, my name is Star. I'm also a 10th grader at Camp Meridian High School in the Technology Academy. Before I moved to Washington, I was in Minnesota and the grading system was different there. And so when I did move to Washington, it was harder for me to stay on track. Back in Minnesota, I was there for my freshman year of high school. It was harder for me to go through the schooling process because my mom, she wasn't as involved. And so for me, it was like I needed that extra support and that push to be more involved in school. So without having that, I kind of like blocked off for a second. So there's no one really there. So I blacked off. But then moving to Washington for my sophomore year, it is hard to get to the new grading system because we are doing industry grading and other schools in different states, and it's hard to adapt to the learning system. But having the extra support from my grandparents is keeps me motivated with the extra support. And I think that other students need the extra support to move on. It helped me a bunch personally. It made me realize how effective having guardians involved in student schooling is, and I think that with having parents involved in school is really important because it helps them keep up with the school's rules and regulations.
Thank you.
And we do have folks on the phone, so if we could try and speak loudly enough that they...
Okay. Shelby Cornish is next to sign in. Shelby.
I'm also a sophomore at Camp High School. As you know, parents and guardians are a major impact on students' lives. They're the ones who raise them, they're the ones who like teach them how to live. I was lucky enough to have parents who supported me through this, but they tried their best to like navigate their both working full-time jobs. I went to a private elementary and middle school that contained 200 kids from preschool to 8th grade, so it was a really small school. We had one class only and one teacher only for each grade, so I was very secluded and very protected from everything. After middle school, I went to Camp High School, which is 10 times more people than I used to, as well as all the different social environments that I was entered in. My parents, also the grading system, that was really different than at my old school. It was something where everyone got A, no matter what happened, where here at the work where you have to make sure you know what you're doing. I wasn't used to this grading system, and so I had my parents to support me with that. I remember coming home one night just being overwhelmed by the change and for the environment that at times when I felt like I was keeping up, my parents would make sure I wouldn't, and they'd make sure I worked out my full potential and that I gave my all. I think that children, teenagers especially, need that adult in their life to keep them going. This is what helps them be successful. It's difficult for students to realize what they're doing or what to take from different situations, and they need that adult figure to help them sort through things. They also need to learn from the good and the bad, because students, they can't recognize what they're doing is wrong if no one else is telling them. So I've been blessed to have parents that support me through this. And as I told my mother, she says it always starts from home, and that needs to be an honest and trustworthy relationship. You know, like the building blocks for a successful life, especially in a teenager's life as they grow up, they need that figure up there to tell them and to help them through. So our parental involvement means so much, I feel, to student causes about life as well as bullying and success.
Thank you, Shelby. We have Ashley Gura.
Hello. So, I'm also a student at Camp Meridian High School, but I'm actually a freshman, and I'm going to represent the rest of my group that was sadly unable to attend this event. So for us, we already proposed a solution for all this parental involvement that we believe that we needed in our society. So in Camp, there is this program called the PASA program, PASA, and that stands for Parent Academy for Student Achievement. And this is a great program, but the only issue is that, as we were talking about before, there's work interfering, there's language barriers, there's transportation issues. There's many different, there's not many parents that are able to go to this event because it's a 9-week course at school, once a week, and you have to have your own transportation to get there, and you have to go there constantly for those 9 weeks in order to get those benefits. In this program, if you think about it, if all the parents were able to attend to this event, this society could have gotten a lot better parental involvement, and it could make such a big impact in the society. But sadly, it's not able to since we're so diverse. And there's like people speaking different languages, 2 jobs being worked, so there's many different reasons why people don't attend this. So for our solution, we proposed a PASA app. So a lot of you guys mostly have like tablets, iPhones, iPods, just something where you can get an application from. And most of these people, when I actually presented my solution, many people stated that they had Snapchat, Vine, Instagram, and all of these are uneducational and don't really make that good of a benefit to our society. But if we create this PASA app, it's the exact same thing as a PASA program, just a lot more accessible for these parents that are unable to speak English or don't have time to go to an actual program. So they can just pull out their phone and start doing this program and get the same benefits. And it'll be free, and you can change it to your own language, and you can be learning about what your child is being taught at school, so you can actually come and help. And as Shelby was saying before, I am also blessed with my parents being involved, but I know from most of my friends that they're not. They're just like their parents are like, oh yeah, can you like tell me what you were doing in school, and then they can't really help them, you know, because the parents don't speak English or they're working jobs. So that's why we proposed this PASA program as an app instead. So,
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, and let me just add that if Ms. Zamorano and her students have any suggestions on how these rules might be modified in order to meet the purposes you've articulated so well, please let us know. The rules are proposed rules. There'll be a lot of discussion on our board before they're adopted. So that's an invitation for your ideas on that. Thank you so much. Next, Yelena's Gura. Yelena's?
Oh, sorry.
Did I?
My husband.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, we didn't put a comment on her name. No comment.
Oh, okay.
So they've signed in.
Okay, I see. All right, right. I'm sorry. There's no X next to the name. I beg your pardon. Julio and Yelena. Next person who signed in to comment is Jerry Bender.
Good afternoon. I'm Jerry Bender with the Association of Washington School Principals. Jerry, do you want to come up?
Yes,
because of the microphone.
Yeah.
There's no microphone. I would be delighted. Come on, Jerry. Let's get it. Jerry Bender with the Association of Washington School Principals, and thanks to the State Board for including us in the discussion. We appreciate the work that's been done and glad to have been a part of it. There's still one area of concern for us, and it deals with the agreement between the students, parents, and guardians or school around the third math credit. That's in Section 202 of the law. And the proposed rule says, with agreement of the student's parent or guardian, or if the parent or guardian is unavailable and do not respond to the request from the school for approval of a specific course, agreement of the school counselor or principal. The issue that would be helpful to get resolved is when there's a dispute between what that third math or science credit should be, who has the ultimate card? If you're going to say the student chooses, then the parents could feel shut out of the process if there's a disagreement between the student and the parent. If the parent chooses, then ultimately between the two, again, if there's a dispute, then the involvement of the parent will feel slighted. And in the same vein, if a student is going to choose, you probably don't need the involvement of the principal or the counselor. So the hiccup attached to it is, and the law says it's either the parent and the student, but it's silent on if there's a dispute between the two. And so that issue needs to be resolved before it gets to the building level, and be glad to work with State Board of Education staff to resolve that one, but that's one that has popped up on our radar screen. With that, if there's any questions, I take them. Otherwise,
do you have a proposed solution?
I've got some thoughts that I'll work with Jack on, and in fact, he and I visited some. Thanks, Jerry.
Sure. Next person to sign in, Representative Hunt is here today, and Representative Rickdahl.
Okay. Do you guys want to come together, or we always do things together, you know?
22nd District Spirit.
22nd District rule. No, anyway. Well, thank you for the opportunity. I don't know if we'd be able to make it to Spokane in July, but we can certainly put our oar in the water on this one. And I want to start out by just a little background on 6552 from a legislative standpoint, and how we got to where we are today. For those of you who don't watch TVW every day, hour by hour, which is probably most of you, I hope. This bill passed in the very waning days of this year's session. And we were at a stage where we didn't think we were going to get a bill. There was so much disagreement over what should be in it. Not only the 1080 hours, but the 24 credits, and some of the parental involvement, and dealing with kids with different abilities, and waivers, and when do we implement this, and all that. We had a list of amendments in the House. I think there were 14 amendments, and we had a Democratic caucus that was probably the longest caucus on any individual bill this year. I think it exceeded 2 hours. And we went through point by point, and finally one of the members stood up and says, I love you all, but I'm not the education guy in the room, and I could vote for all of these, I could vote for none of these, I don't know what to do. And so we took a break and did a little vote count, and at the same time the Speaker of the House, Frank Chop, called a couple of us into the, what he called at that stage, the principal's office, and said, can you work tonight? This was about 4 o'clock in the evening. Can you work tonight and come up with something that we can get 50 votes for tomorrow? And we sort of froze in our tracks, got the deer in the headlight look, because, to take something like this and turn it around and in 12 hours. But Representative Rickdahl and I and several others and some staff got together, and we went through the amendments, and we crafted one amendment to the bill that took what we thought were the key points from those 14 amendments. And we put that into a bill, and then it was up to us as members also not only to get our members, but we wanted bipartisan support, so we had to talk to the Republican members in the House, which would be great. You get 98 votes in the House, that would be wonderful, but if it didn't pass the Senate, you still aren't anywhere. So we had to go talk to the House and get the support of the House and the various education groups, the lobby groups, the parent groups, the various other folks that were deeply involved in this bill. And oddly enough, in this 12-hour, it turned out to be about a 24-hour period, we got agreement. We came together on this amendment, and this bill passed. And it went to the Senate and passed with an overwhelming vote. So we got a strong bipartisan vote from the House and the Senate, and sent the bill to the governor, and he signed it. Now, it's not to say, it looked easy at the time, but it wasn't. And there are a lot of tipping points in this, and that's what we're concerned about. And there are several things that we want to make sure that are clarified as the state board goes through and looks at this process and does the implementation. So I think that's the important point, that it wasn't easy and it wasn't a foregone conclusion. And when we put our amendment out on the House floor, we were told, there's no way the Senate will like that. And the Senate leaders who were involved in this looked at it and said, yeah, we think we can go with this. And several of the groups and the governor's office, we didn't know how the governor was going to feel. We sat down, we talked to the governor's staff with Marcy and others, and we sort of agreed that, you have to realize in the legislative reason, as much as we think there's never a perfect bill. And there are things, and
we may have to come back and look at some things in this, certainly in education as we go through the education reform McCleary. We'll have to keep looking and refining and modifying. But I just want to point out that this was a very tough decision, and it was something that came together almost miraculously, but it was not easy. So with that in mind, Representative Rakedall has a couple, 3 points about the bill itself that a group of us legislators have been working on, who are on the education and higher education committees and have been looking at.
Thank you, Sam. I'm State Representative Chris Rakedall, for the record, legislator, House member from the 22nd District here in Olympia. To feed off of what Sam said, I want to be really clear about 3 points that have come to our attention as things that folks may not have a consistent understanding of or may question the legislative intent around. I want to be very candid where we clearly had conversation and made an explicit judgment about something, or where we just didn't have the conversation and thus probably why it's wide open and subject to interpretation, and then maybe some recommendations going forward. First, I think the most significant issue is the 2-credit waiver. We clearly did not have the votes for this legislation until both sides got together. One of my roles was to be the liaison to the House Republican caucus. I think very consistently their priority was local control and flexibility for students. Those were 2 things they consistently brought forward. Representative David Taylor was the primary spokesperson for them in this conversation at the end. The bill does not say that we should limit the 2 credits to the last 7. 7 flexible credits. It says 2 credits. It's pretty clear. This is where I want to be very candid with you and say some of us are quite nervous that this would allow for an individualized education plan for a student that would say, hey, I want to take Algebra 1 my freshman year and never take another math class. That is not what anyone intended. So the language that was put in there was unusual circumstances. And here's your legislative lesson of the day. Those words mean nothing once you pass a bill. Everyone has a different interpretation of what that means. I think our intent is to suggest to you that had we been very intentional about this, we would have kept the 2-credit flexible on all 24, not just 7 of the credits, but we would have really clarified what those 2 words mean so that it was not a green light for students to sign up for 1 math class and get a high school diploma. The intent here is to get students to take more math and more science, 3 credits of math, 3 credits of science, or more. But there truly are unusual circumstances where they need to opt out of that. And so we just leave you with that idea that while we also share some nervousness that I think some State Board of Ed members share about this pathway being less rigorous, that is not the intent. It should be more rigorous with some flexibility. Second, with respect to clarifying the intent on parents. Parents work with students. The presumption today, if you're a school counselor, is you work out that semester course schedule with your student, and it gets entered into the system, and there's a presumption that the student's going to talk to their parents. I think we wanted to make that a stronger connection. Our druthers to you is that you are on the right track here to really emphasize that the student and parent come first, and the counselor principal are in the back seat in that relationship. So we would suggest you're on the right track there. We don't have answers. We didn't discuss explicitly what happens in the conflict between a student and a parent. Those conflicts happen today. It moves forward. That's really up to the home to figure out. The other thing we didn't clarify is, does this imply an added administrative burden? Will we now need 50 or 60,000 pieces of paper to go home that get signed that say, yes, I affirmatively agree with the schedule that my student is contemplating here? We just didn't cover that. That's one of those areas where I want to be candid. We didn't have discussion on whether there should be more documentation or less. The third issue is with respect to the high school and beyond plan. When I wear my other hats, college administrator and a board member on a private education foundation, I can tell you I put a decade into this concept of high school and beyond and planning. And everything the State Board of Education is learning and developing is right on track. These things don't work unless they begin in the 7th or 8th grade or even earlier. That said, we've had discussion amongst the group who wrote the final striking amendment, and we believe that that's one of those areas we just did not get to in any detail. We agree with the policy construct that this has to happen early, but the legislative language is extremely clear in this case. It says local districts make that determination. And so our recommendation to the board on this is that on this one, you do not write a rule that prescribes 7th or 8th grade when even though the policy is the right direction, I think it would clearly get in front of the legislation and create a conflict. We are already talking about coming back next year and clarifying with lots of research the need for a 7th and 8th grade high school and beyond plan timeline, and the clarification on point number 1 about unusual circumstances. We know we owe you a little bit more work. It would be premature in rule this year to go with 7th and 8th grade, in our opinion, in the absence of that work on our part. So I'll pause if staff has any questions or anybody else.
I do have a question, actually, Representative Rickdahl. Is your opinion that the proposed language on the agreement of, et cetera, with regard to the third math course and third science course is consistent with the legislative intent? That was a little challenging, has been challenging.
Yeah, commas matter. We probably didn't put commas in the right place on all the ors, but based on the conversation, the subsequent conversations we've had, again, the folks who wrote the final striking amendment, juxtaposed against your proposed rule, we think you're on the right track here. You're putting the parent in first position with the student. You're putting the counselor principal in second position. I suppose there are lots of scenarios where the parent is not involved in a child's life, and then somebody else is going to have to sign off on that form, which historically has been a school counselor.
That's the intent, and
Yep.
it's not just our intent. It's what we discern to be the intent of the legislature from the placement of the R's, of the ors, and the combinations of the vowels. I'm sorry, the nouns, not the vowels.
You're on the right track.
Conjunctions, whatever, yeah.
Conjunctions and, and nouns. That's what it was about. And commas.
I want to add just one quick thing. As I said, this was, we worked on this bill all session, but this final amendment came together in a rush, and I think that's part of the reason we have all those ors strung in there. And we didn't let, it was my amendment, but the English major didn't go through and look at it that closely, I guess. But the other thing we did, because we understand unusual circumstance is hard to define, so we directed the Washington State School Directors Association, which is the association that represents school boards and school board members. It is a state agency. We directed that agency to develop a model policy that school district boards of directors can use when they implement the waiver process. And so hopefully, and they've done this a lot before, so I have faith that we can work with them and work with the state board, and we'll get to a good point there. But there is that intervening where the State Board of Education and the School Directors Association can work together and work with school districts to try to put some fences around unusual circumstances and the whole process for waiver.
And just to clarify, on the high school and beyond plan, your belief or your view is that the components, the elements of high school and beyond plan and proposed rules go further than legislative intent, and prefer that there not be elaboration in rules.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
Of course, there's two issues here. One is the components. The other is the specific issue that you raised, which was the 7th and 8th grade. Now, I'll say that in the discussion of the board, it became pretty apparent that there's actually no way to do a high school and beyond plan if you don't start in 8th grade, because you choose your 9th grade classes in 8th grade. So we felt like we were essentially stating what is, but by stating what is and raising the profile of the 8th grade as the starting point, perhaps more than just the selection of courses for 9th grade would occur in the 8th grade, but actual full-blown planning. Now, if that is counter to your intent, we would certainly want to know it, but the clarity I'm seeking here is the difference between these components, which versus the 8th grade issue.
Components are excellent. Even the thrust for a 7th or 8th grade initiation of the plan is right on from a policy standpoint, and that's where I'm trying to be very clear with you. What we don't want to do is get too rigid in rule today in the absence of law, because the law is really clear. It says up to local districts, and in that case, you don't get a lot of flexibility, right? We needed to say subject to the rules of the state board or something. We didn't say that. Probably should have. So I think the better pathway here is to put the core elements in, and then in partnership between OSPI, State Board of Education, and some other policy experts, send out supplemental material that says, folks, this is the way this works best from every expert around the country. We go in 7th or 8th grade, these are the elements, these are components. I would just hesitate to put in rule the number 7 or the number 8 because I do think it creates a conflict with law.
All right, thank you for clarifying.
And you can request next year, or we can just work on it next year.
Thanks for that
clarification.
That was actually a hugely important clarification.
Yeah, good.
Because then we will not take out these components, but the board will consider the striking of the reference to 8th grade. Excellent.
Yes.
Anything else? Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thanks for all the work you've done.
We've got some rooms on the hill if you ever want a bigger room.
Yeah. And we have air conditioning.
Oh, not in San Antonio, though, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. But we got to get through some other folks first.
Oh, so the legislature, the end of the sign-up list.
I just had a clarifying question.
Go ahead.
Yes.
For the model policy, is there anything that directs?
Amy, can you speak up so the microphone?
Representative Hunt raised that they didn't really have enough time to flesh out the definition of unusual circumstances, and that they asked WASDA to come up with a model policy. I'm just wondering what WASDA's process is for that, and if there is a directive to get input from those community members that are affected and other organizations.
I believe there is, but I don't know specifically what that process is. And I served as a school board member for 8 years, and I worked on, I remember seeing draft model policies come in. I know they circulate the policy among their board members. I assume that it will be circulated or can be circulated among interest groups and the general public as well. But the best thing is to check with WASDA and see what its process is. And I don't know where WASDA is on this at this stage.
That's the end of our sign-up sheet. However, we have this room to... Oh, I'm sorry.
So is there anyone else in the room who wants to speak before we go to the folks online?
Okay, so I'm going to read the comments and questions from the folks online, and we will take them in the order they were received, except for there was one that is meant for the legislators that are here, so I just want to read that one real quick first. It is from Jim, I'm going to butcher this, Kowalkowski from Davenport, and he wanted to thank the two legislators for their testimony and their insight. The 2-credit waiver flexibility will be used wisely and carefully by districts. And they thank you for trusting our public schools. This is a message we do not always hear. Okay, so we'll start with the first one we received is a question from Mary Beth Tack, and the question is, give a couple examples of extenuating circumstances for the 2-credit waiver.
Shall I? Cannot.
Go ahead, do the best you can.
Well, the phrase used in the legislation, in the law, I should say, is unusual circumstances. And as Representative Hunt Rakedahl said, unusual circumstances is not defined in the Act. It states that districts shall have written policies on that, and the Act also includes an additional section on a model policy to be developed by the Washington State School Directors Association. And the language of the bill says that the model policies must take into consideration the unique limitations of a student that may be associated with such circumstances as homelessness, limited English proficiency, medical conditions that impair a student's opportunity to learn, or disabilities, regardless of whether the student has an individualized education program or a plan under Section 504 of the Federal Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And so it lists those circumstances that the model policy must take into consideration, or that the Washington State School Directors Association must take into consideration developing the policy doesn't say that it shall include, the language it shall take into consideration. So because it is a locally determined policy, it's a question that would really be needed, that would need to be asked of the district who will adopt the policy.
Okay. Question number 2 is also from Mary Beth. Will additional continued money be directed to the implementation of 24 credit requirement from McCleary above and beyond consistently each year?
Yeah. Well, it's a question the state board can't answer. It's a question the legislature has to answer. However,
I'll take a shot at it.
Yeah, Ben.
So, indeed, we cannot answer that question. I will say, in the presence of 2 very distinguished legislators here, that the legislature has made in law very, very substantial commitments to public schools, and those students who are not yet in high school, but will need to make the higher standard of Common Core, will need to meet the higher standard of 24 credits, and those commitments have been made in law, and they cost billions of dollars. And so, we all need to play a part here in making sure that the legislature follows through on that commitment, because they may not specifically have the term high school and beyond plan on them. They may not specifically have the term high school graduation 24 credits, but funding for pupil transportation and funding for guidance counselors and funding for lower class size in high school and funding for science teachers, funding for guidance counselors. These are all things that play some critical part and brought all together provide the resources necessary for students to achieve that higher standard. So, we've done the job of raising the bar for students, but we got to raise the bar for ourselves, the adults. It's time for us to step up. We can't just raise the bar for students and expect that everything's going to be okay. So, and of course, we can't answer your question.
Okay, the next comment is from Jim in Davenport again. The proposed wording to WAC 180-16-200 looks very good, and I appreciate the language stating that a district-wide annual average of 1,027 instructional hours in grades 1 through 12 will meet the requirement. My question regarding this is the 5-day waiver for seniors. Can we still count on these 5 days as instructional time, and is it addressed already in a WAC?
It is provided in this bill. This bill amends the statute to provide that those 5 days for seniors, which may be waived in current law, maybe be waived from the 180-day requirement, count toward the instructional hour requirements. So that is in law, and yes, Superintendent, you may count on that because the legislature decided that.
Okay. Jim's next comment is regarding the amended proposed language for WAC 180-51-067. The language regarding a required culminating project is stricken. Why not amend this with depending on local school board policy and keep the language? For many districts, the culminating project is a great thing, and the WAC could clearly state that this is a local decision. Thank you.
Dan, would you like to respond to that one?
Sure. Now, as a general rule, it's not, the rules that agencies write are supposed to be a direct outflow of the laws that the legislature enacts, and the laws give us the authority to write that rule. When the law strikes the requirement for something, an agency doesn't really have the authority to create a rule and then make it optional. It's as if the requirement never existed. Now, that's distinct from a local school board policy, in which I would encourage school districts to do exactly what Superintendent Kolakowski is saying, many of whom don't have to get rid of their culminating project, and I think many State Board of Ed members would wish that they would not, because we think it's an important part of a student's educational journey. But as a formal matter of rule writing, I don't think we have the authority to write that rule.
Okay. Next, we have a question from Mary Beth. Currently, we have the Washington State Diploma, 20 credits. Is this option completely removed? The only option is the 24 credit with the unusual rare option of 24 with 2 waves. Is that correct? Can you specifically talk about this?
Yes, I can speak to that. The legislation, the statute, enables a school district to choose to delay.
It's Mary Beth Tech.
Mary Beth, okay. Enables a school district to choose to delay implementation of the 24 credit graduation requirements for up to 2 years, and they implement with the class of 2020 or the class of 2021. The district submits a waiver application to the State Board of Education. The statute says that the State Board shall grant the waiver, so there's not discretion on the part of the State Board, and none is provided for in rule. And if a district does elect to implement the career and college ready graduation requirements for the class of 2020 or the class of 2021, during the term of the waiver, that district would continue to implement the existing WAC on graduation requirements. And that's how that works.
So the current graduation requirements could,
the 20 credit.
The 20 credit could pertain going all the way back to current 6th graders, correct?
Yeah,
5th graders.
Okay, we have one final clarifying question from Mary Beth. This is in response to some comments that were made earlier about whether or not there was a contradiction. In the SBE paperwork, the 2 credits that can be waived can be only arts and or world, I'm guessing language is supposed to be there, based on PPR. I believe the individual that spoke earlier said that it was only in math and science that was a contradiction. Could you clarify?
I don't think that was the comment. In the rules which implement the resolution of the State Board, a student can substitute a personalized pathway requirement for one arts course or personalized pathway requirements, which are student-chosen courses aligned with the High School and Beyond plan for both the world languages credits. And those are current rules, and it follows exactly what the legislature directed the State Board to do in implementing its resolution.
Okay, and we have one piece of written comment from someone who was trying to be here but couldn't be and would like it read into the record. So those that are online, while I read this, this is your last chance to type in any comments or questions that you have. So this is comment prepared by Wendy Rader-Konofowski from the Washington Education Association. WEA has identified 4 sections of concern. 3 sections where we feel the SBE has stepped over the bounds of its authority and proposed rules that exceed the scope and intent of SB 6552. And 1 section where we feel needs a simple amendment. Those areas are the authority for school districts to waive up to 2 credits of the 24 credit framework for individual students under unusual circumstances, mandating high school and beyond plans to begin in middle school, adding extra requirements to the district waiver of the 24 credit framework, and laboratory science definition. The authority for school districts to waive up to 2 credits for individual students of the 24 credit framework under unusual circumstances. We request removal of the stipulation that the 2 credit waiver does not apply to the so-called 17 core credit requirements. The statute specifically gives school districts the authority to waive up to 2 credits for individual students based on unusual circumstances and in accordance with written policies that must be adopted by each board of directors of the school district that grants diplomas. It also specifically requires WASA to adopt a model policy on this specific subject and gives them until June 30, 2015 to accomplish this task. We would argue that this addition is not consistent with the spirit or intent of the amendment passed at the end of the session, which allowed this bill to be passed off the House floor. Legislators we have spoken to are clear that they did not intend any particular credits to be off limits to the 2-credit waiver. It limits local flexibility, and it undermines the legislative requirement for WASA to create its model policy without a restriction on its charge. Its SPE puts forth these rules 1 year in advance. Thank you. In advance of the model policy requirement for WASA, which isn't until June 2015. This appears to be an end run on the process as outlined in the statute. Number 2, the timing of the high school and beyond plan. WEA requests removing the mandate to move high school and beyond plan development into the middle school. Section 2021C in 6552 stipulates that any decision on whether a student has met the state board's high school graduation requirements for a high school and beyond plan shall remain at the local level. Yet SBE proposed rule WAC 18051.068 puts into place a requirement that a high school and beyond plan must include a 4-year plan for course taking created in middle school grades, 10C. While there might be merit to starting work on the high school and beyond plan in middle school, the fact is that it is not a requirement at this time. Including high school and beyond plan as a requirement in middle school would, in fact, be an entirely new policy which has not been vetted through the legislative process and remains entirely outside of the scope and authority of the SBE to mandate in rules. Before any decisions about moving high school and beyond plans into middle school, policy discussions with stakeholders to consider workload implications, funding and staffing needs, including especially counseling staffing at the middle school level, would have to take place through the legislative process, not SBE rulemaking. RCW 28A 305-135 requiring the SBE to conduct a school district fiscal impact statement for any significant rule changes would apply. Third is the extra requirements for district waiver of 24-credit framework. WEA requests removing language that requires a school district resolution to accompany a waiver application. According to Section 202(1)II, districts wishing to waive the 24-credit framework for up to 2 years can apply by describing why the waiver is being requested, the specific impediments preventing timely implementation, and efforts that will be taken to achieve implementation with the graduating class proposed under the waiver. The SBE shall grant a waiver under this subsection 1B to an applying school district at the next subsequent meeting of the board after receiving an application. In SBE's proposed rules, WAC 185-51-068-11AII, an additional requirement is mandated that the application be accompanied by a resolution adopted by the district board of directors requesting a waiver under this section. The resolution shall state the entering freshman class or classes for whom the waiver is requested and be signed by the board chair or president and district superintendent. This may be a good idea, and in fact it may be something that districts will want to do. However, it is a mandate and adds a step to the waiver process that the statute does not require. Since the legislature very intentionally made this a waiver that should be easy and quickly expedited by the SBE without any options for denying the request, such a requirement is not warranted and continues the pattern of the SBE overstepping their authority and bounds of statute in their rulemaking process. Last one, number 4, laboratory science definition. WEA requests add to the NSTA definition of lab science the NSTA definition of support for science labs. Senate Bill 6552 does not contain a definition for lab science. The new 24-credit framework requires that all students take 3 credits of science, 2 of which must be in laboratory science. SBE proposed rules WAC 180-51-068-14-9A defines laboratory science as any instruction that provides opportunities for students to interact directly with the material world or with data drawn from the material world using the tools, data collection techniques, models, and theories of science. A laboratory science course meeting the requirement of this section may include courses conducted in classroom facilities specifically designed for laboratory science or coursework in traditional classrooms, outdoor spaces, or other settings which accommodate elements of laboratory science as identified in this subsection. We think this definition might be a good idea as it provides flexibility for schools and teachers in the delivery of lab science courses. However, insofar as it also might impinge negatively on districts' funding requests or needs for traditional lab classrooms, we would suggest an addition to this definition. It appears that the definition SBE has used here comes from the National Science Teachers Association. That being the case, there is another part to the NSTA definition which would clarify the issue, and we suggest all salient portions of it be included in the SBE proposed rule definitions of lab science. It goes on to just have pasted in the NTSA rules. Would you like me to read those?
If they're part of the document, how long is it?
Another 2 paragraphs.
Go ahead and read it.
Okay. Support for science labs. To ensure that laboratory investigations are implemented in schools, administrative support is crucial. NSTA recommends that the school administration recognize the instructional importance, overarching goals, and essential activities of laboratory investigations, and provide the following. An adequate facility where labs can be conducted. At the preschool and elementary levels, this means a classroom with sufficient workspace, including flat, movable desks or tables and chairs, equipment, and access to water and electricity. At the middle and high school levels, a safe, well-equipped lab space should be available with necessary equipment and access to water and electricity. In addition, appropriate facilities to work with students with special needs should be provided. Adequate storage space for all materials, including devices and materials in common use that are considered hazardous. Funding for yearly educator training on how to manage materials and guide inquiry-based learning during labs. A budget for regular maintenance of facilities and equipment, as well as annual costs for new or replacement equipment, supplies, and proper waste management. A budget that recognizes additional costs required for field experiences. Laboratory occupancy load limits, number of occupants allowed in the laboratory. Set a safe level based on building and fire safety codes, size and design of the laboratory teaching facility, chemical, physical, biological hazards, and the needs of the students. Science classes should have no more than 24 students, even if the occupancy load limit might accommodate more. Research data shows that accidents rise dramatically as class enrollment exceeds this level. Teachers should not be faced with a Hobson's choice, teach in an unsafe environment or sacrifice the quality of teaching by not doing labs.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to that discussion.
Okay.
But not this afternoon. Now, the students just got a glimpse into the fascinating world of rulemaking.
We did get 2 more comments online while I was reading. One is just a follow-up from Jim that says, thanks for letting folks participate in the webinar. It's very much appreciated. They have their graduation ceremony tomorrow, so there's no way they could miss that. And then we have one from Grace Wan. I'm commenting on behalf of the School Alliance. I would like to thank Representative Hunt and Representative Reichdahl for the comments that they provided this afternoon. Their statements outline the legislative intent to allow the 2-credit waiver to apply to all 24 credits. We endorse this approach and support the local decision-making process by elected school board members. We look forward to working with the State Board on amendments to this proposed rule.
Thank you. And I feel the discourtesy to introduce 2 of our colleagues on State Board staff, Linda Drake, who is Research Director, and Julie Suleiman, who is a Senior Policy Analyst and have worked hard on components of these requirements and these rules, and will continue to over the next few months. So Linda and Julia. Comments or questions from anyone? So, ma'am.
I'm a parent, so I'm not worried about funding and all that as much as I am is where did the high school requirements for graduation in Washington State put our students in getting in colleges, particularly outside of Washington State, as far as nationally in other states? Are we in line with what they require? Are we a little higher than what we require? Or
That's a really
are we
good
a little
question.
lower? That as a parent, that's what I'm worried about.
Can I ask my colleague Linda, I think, who has done that kind of
Well, very broadly and very sweepingly, I would say that the 20 credit requirement that we're currently working on is a little low compared to the total credit requirement in other states, and the 24 is probably a little bit higher. One of the purposes of the 24 credit was to align with Washington State admission requirements of the four-year universities. We wanted to include flexibility so students could choose other pathways, but that they would be able to meet the admission requirements. And as far as admission to Washington State universities, that's pretty comparable to other universities outside of the state.
Thank you.
And in particular, with not, of course, not just about the total number of credits, right? So, we're really very pleased with the work of the legislature over the last 5 sessions, where they moved us from a deficit situation where we only required 2 credits of math and 2 credits of science, which really put us on par with the very lowest of states in terms of what we expect of students, which is ironic given the economy that we have here in Washington State and the high-paying jobs waiting for these bright young folks, to being much more competitive with our competitors, because it is a competitive economy, and Microsoft has not shown any hesitancy in going to other states and getting their talent. And so beyond just requiring more credits, we're requiring some rigor in the core content as well.
Thank you
And
very much.
these gentlemen are to be commended for doing that. So.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question? Well, with that, I guess we'll adjourn and thank everyone for coming. This has been a very helpful session.
And if you weren't able to sign in when you first came in, if you could sign in before you leave, that would be great. Very best.